What's up, traders? Matt from the Trade Brigade here with your weekend crypto report, where, as always, I do a technical analysis and give you my thoughts on the coins listed up above. We have made an addition to the watch list. We've added COVAL USD, which is, of course, the hot name on the street right now. You can see it's up about 64% on the day. But further than that, I do think there's something interesting about that project, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the video. With that out of the way, let's jump right into our Bitcoin daily chart here. A couple of quick notes. The first one would be, obviously we've broken down, and in last week's video we were talking about this holding up as the ideal area of support. So you could speculate all day long on what caused this sell-off here. You could say, number one, maybe it was the stock market panic. Number two, you could say, hey, maybe it was sort of inflation fears. Number three, you could say it was the new variation of the sickness. Number four, you could even start to say, hey, it's deleveraging crypto assets here, a lot of liquidation across portfolios. Could be any combination of those four. However, if you were following the technicals here, basically you would have known as a swing trader to stop out underneath the support trend line. You would have avoided a larger loss. And if you're an investor like myself in crypto and you just like to stay involved, then you could have employed the DCA or dollar cost averaging strategy and bought a little bit of a position here at around $47,000 per coin. This is a level we did have mapped out and talked about in last week's video. So with that kind of out of the way, what's the forward outlook here? Well, I would certainly point out a couple of things. Number one would be, where did we set our lower high, right? Technically, we now have a break of the support trend line, and on the back test from this little dead cat bounce, we resisted right at the back test. So that is noteworthy, indicating that the sellers still have control, right? So that's number one. Number two would be our block theory, right? If we do something like this, then we know that block 3 is up here. Ideally, we would have stayed in block 3. However, I could start to see the case for building out a block 4 that might look something like this. Now, it's about a half step down from block number 3, but it's still a half step up from block number 2. So it's not the end of the world as long as we hold on to, again, that 47,000 round number here. If we do start to break it, and we'll talk in terms of scenarios on the 4-hour in just a second, I want you to see where the next daily support is coming from at $41,000 per coin. Prior support from right here was prior resistance, resistance, resistance. So a very well-respected technical level at and around 41,000 would be the downside target on a break of 47, okay? So with that all out of the way, let's go ahead and first take off the support trend line. Now we'll drill down to the 4-hour time frame. And what we'll notice here is a couple of things. I want to start speculating on patterns. There's really not any confirmation of this, but these are some scenarios that I would want to watch out for here inside of Bitcoin. So number one would be this, and what I've just drawn in is, of course, a double bottom, right? You have touch number one, touch number two, there's the double bottom portion. The neckline would be the bounce, the retest and resistance at the support trendline backtest. That's roughly around 52,000. Now, because it's so close to the bottom end of block number 3, which, as we discussed, is 53,000, because it's so close as well to the resistance trendline, that I would say you should probably wait for a little bit more confirmation here instead of just looking for the break of this. Because, right overhead, we have more resistance, right? So again, a little bit more confirmation is needed if this pans out in the first place. Again, let me remind you that this has not even started to happen yet. We do not even start to have a little bit of a bounce off of touch number 2. Very, very speculative, but a scenario to potentially watch for as a long entry if we can clear some of this resistance, next taking us to 56 and then $60,000 per coin here in Bitcoin. So again, that's one potential scenario. Another scenario, a bearish scenario, would look something like this. We do get a little bit of lift, but we turn around and retest $47,000 per coin. Now, in that instance, we have this, and now I've just drawn in a lower high. You could certainly draw in a resistance trend line, and that gives you a descending triangle pattern. That's a bearish pattern. So if that's how it unfolds, then watch for this to turn into a flush point, and any breakdown should take us to that daily support at $41,000 per coin, which we just discussed, right? So those are two scenarios in both directions for you to watch out for. Now, could it just go sideways here and do something like this? Absolutely. I'm not saying it can't do that, but those are two directional setups that could potentially give you an edge here inside of Bitcoin. So hopefully that was useful. Let's continue on here and talk about Ethereum. Ethereum's not as bad, in my estimation at least, as what we just saw in Bitcoin. And the reason being is, if we look at the chart overall, you could do your same sort of building blocks strategy, right? Do something like this. This is probably your next block, and then this is the top block. And as of right now, we're only back one block, as opposed to Bitcoin, which is overlapping stopping in block number 2 and 3. So with that kind of relative strength behind the name right now, what would I be watching out for? Well, we're currently at the bottom end of the most relevant block. That's this one right here. And as we know, there's always opportunity at the bottom for either mean reversion or a breakdown, and there's opportunity at the top for a breakout or mean reversion. As it sits right now, we have printed, technically speaking, here's a low, here's a higher low, here's a set of higher lows. So as of right now, we do have higher lows. We have a 4-hour hammer candle that printed, the last 4-hour bar. So we'll see if ultimately we can make it into about $4,200 per coin, and then monitor for the top end of the range. Because this one has been so sideways, I would just say if you are going to trade this, if you are going to try to take the long off the bottom end of the range, I would I would size the position accordingly, right? Maybe take some smaller size here, noting that we've already seen fairly aggressive breakdowns in the coin in the past. Bitcoin's not doing fantastic, at least as of right now, so it wouldn't be unreasonable. I wouldn't be surprised if it did fall out of range again and took out 39.50 to the downside. So again, please size it accordingly if you are going to take a stab at it long here, looking for this, and again with a stop just underneath the low end at 39.50. So those are kind of my thoughts on Ethereum. Some decent relative strength, but with the overall crypto market kind of hurting right now and in a more decent downtrend in some of these other names, which we'll look at, I wouldn't push your luck trying to trade something like Ethereum. To the downside, if it does break, then be on the lookout for about 36.58. In that instance, again, just like we talked about in Bitcoin, maybe we get some sort of pattern down here. It looks like a double bottom, break of the neckline, takes you back higher, could look like an inverted head and shoulders, right? Something like this. Neckline break takes you back higher. Could be a number of things, but it needs to be a pattern at and around 36.58. So those are my thoughts here inside of Ethereum. Next up, we have Binance Coin. And this one has also broken its support trendline just like Bitcoin, but notice that it's not as aggressive, right? We're currently not consolidating here down towards these lows, and it's really starting to feel more like a break sideways through time. So again, not as bearish as what we saw in Bitcoin there. We're going to go ahead and remove it. It's no longer really in play. And what I would say is in play is just the fact that once again, like we have in Ethereum, we do have higher lows. We have a 4-hour hammer candle that printed on the last session. We'll ultimately have to see if it comes back to here. Now, if we make the move to 606 and pull back for a higher low, I would then watch for a reattempt to break it and bring us into the daily or 4-hour resistance trendline. Now, when we get there, that is going to be very interesting in my estimation as well, and enticing rather for longs, noting that we've knocked on the door. So we have 1, 2, or well, let's call it anchor. 1, 2, 3, 4, this would be the 5th knock on the door. And typically what you say is that you can only knock a number of times here before eventually someone answers, aka a move up here into the high at 668. Okay, so that's one scenario for Binance Coin. Again, is it going to happen that way? I can't say for certain, but it's something to be watching out for. If we take out the lows here around 563, I would just be patient and again watch out for a pattern here at the 520. Anything underneath that gets a little bit more nasty, about, what would that be, $75 lower into 455. Okay, so keep those levels in mind if we get more of a sell-off, more continued selling pressure here inside of the crypto market. Let's continue on and talk about Cardano. And this one has just been weak for a while now. And again, remember that was sort of surprising, remembering it was the relative strength monster from that move in there. So nearly 100% of that move has been retraced. If you wanted to count it from starting here and then higher, yes, 100% of that has been retraced. But if you want to count the true low down here, close to about $1.01, we're not quite all the way there. So just to give you an idea of where that's coming from, if I look left here, you can see it's a big shelf, historic shelf of support at 101. Okay, you could call it $1 even if you'd like inside of Cardano. Zooming in and adjusting a little bit here, what you'll also notice is we have 2 parallel resistance trend lines. Sure, this one has not been violated, so touch 1, touch 2, and then this one is a little bit better fit, getting a lot more touches, but certainly a little bit of a violation on that move right there. So I'm leaving them both on for now. You can see it is being respected into the past couple of instances where there's been interaction, so it's something to continue to monitor for. This one's obviously in the most aggressive downtrend that we've seen so far in today's video, so please be skeptical of longs in Cardano. If we did come down into about $1 even, that 101 area, definitely on your radar for a historic level, potentially producing some sort of bounce, and a significant bounce, I would say. I don't really think it's going to be like, oh, it moved about 10 cents higher and then it's going to roll back over for lower. I do think that this level is significant enough to maybe produce a bounce back up into some of these highs from in here. So it could be around 150, 160, kind of something of that nature, okay? So that's what I would watch out for inside of Cardano. If that does happen, keep an eye on those resistance trend lines, right? As of right now, you could start to classify this in here as a descending triangle that sets up the breakdown of 1.25, give or take, to get us into that support underneath at 1, which we just discussed. So that is Cardano in a nutshell. Next up, we have Solana. And taking a look at this one, this too has broken its support trend line. Let's just throw it on auto here and scrunch up the chart a bit. And what you'll remember is that this was the primary support trend line, right? We did have one that ultimately looked like this at one point in time. So the fact that the primary is now starting to break is slightly more concerning. If we take a closer look here, we'll get rid of that support trend line. So there we go. We're kind of in between ranges right now. And what I mean by that is we're just in this void of price action right here. And whenever you're in the middle of a void, it's usually a 50-50 shot for higher or lower. So I would say this is not the one to be touching right now. If we do come a little bit lower into 168, be on the lookout for reversals. It was a big prior area of resistance here, and even in the past as well, resistance and resistance. So keep that in mind as a downside target. But anything underneath, really the one you need to see hold up would be closer to about 150. Okay, so Solana not looking great for any actionable setups as of right now, being in the middle of range, but watch out for both of those targets on the upside. If we get to here and give ourselves a higher low pullback and reattempt, that does set up a breakout up and over 184 to maybe make it to the top of the prior range at 202. I would really start focusing on 200 psychological if that's ultimately how it wants to pan out. Okay, and again, just like we discussed in Bitcoin, that's a very speculative scenario. Let's continue on here with Litecoin. We know that this has been the relative weakness monster. It always has been, never really making it too far out of its own way from in here. And certainly right back down in that foundational block, this one right in here. Again, just like we discussed in Solana, we're kind of in the midpoint of a range. If I go ahead and expand this a little so it's easier to see, we're just in the middle of this brick right here. So whenever we're in the middle, as we just mentioned, it's about a 50-50 shot for higher or lower, not the time to be touching it. If you did want to get involved, be on the lookout for 143 to the downside for potential support there. And to the upside, just like in Solana, if we did something like this, higher low pullback, then reattempt in short proximity of time, maybe it takes you to the resistance trend line. But just like we talked about in Bitcoin, I would probably wait for more confirmation and just breaking all of this overhead resistance overall before looking for longs in Litecoin to maybe take us closer to about 187. Okay, so this is probably just not the one to be touching over the course of the weekend in my estimation here. I would start to even classify this as an overall, 4-hour bear flag, weak consolidation down here towards these lows. So next up we have Ripple. And Ripple is starting to do something more like what we saw in Ethereum and Binance Coin with the higher lows. So expanding this a little bit, make it easier on the eyes. Here we go, right? Lows, higher lows, higher lows, higher lows. Let's see if we can actually draw on a support trend line that's reasonable here. I don't want to come in from that, dramatic low, but instead maybe something like this. We're kind of at that support trend line. It's being tested now, technically underneath it. It's not the cleanest thing in the world. I actually just think it's distracting, so I'm going to remove it. It's probably just about the horizontal level, to be quite honest with you, and holding up above 80 cents. If that happens, fine, checks out for the potential bounce back to the top end at 88 cents, and then it's all about the resistance trend line. This one, again, maybe it's the start of something with these higher lows, but again, it's just all about 80 cents, I would say. If it holds, fantastic. If it does start to break down, probably just want to avoid Ripple here. Some lower targets would be 69 cents, and then anything underneath. If we scrunch up the chart, what do we got? Looking left here, let's grab the other tool. I would start focusing in on this area around 58 cents. It's also very close to that liquidation low that we have in here. Maybe you bump it up and just say it's 60 even, okay? And I know these pennies make a difference on these cryptos, but again, we don't want to split hairs, okay? So that's Ripple. Up next, we have Polkadot. This one, kind of just like what we saw in Litecoin with the bear flag consolidation happening here. However, we are at the low end. We're basically at a support point. So it does make sense if you were looking for longs back up to the top of the range at 30 from about 2667, 2650, this general area, right? Stop loss goes underneath, looking for a target up here, certainly at minimum a 3-to-1 there. So let's zoom in on this, actually make it a little bit better for you to see on your screens. Maybe if you're on a phone, this will help. Apologies for that. We also have that same phenomenon of higher-ish lows. These are more equal lows, but you get the gist. So Polkadot, not looking so bad. I could honestly see a trade like that developing here. We are resolving that 4-hour hammer candle to the upside with a solid green-bodied candle thus far. Let's see how it closes and if we can get back into about 30. From there, that's really going to be the ultimate test. We know that that's sort of the consolidation top of the flag right now. So 30, important resistance to the upside. If it resolves higher, I would start saying look for the resistance trend line, not so much this 32, noting that we would be going back to quote unquote the scene of the crime where the breakdown really started from, which is up here. And again, could be on par with that resistance trend line depending on when that ultimately unfolds, if that ultimately unfolds. Any breakdowns of 26, 23, 35 is the next support underneath us, and scrunching up the chart back on auto just to see what we have underneath that. It's about 19. Okay, so quite a ways to fall. Would not want to be involved to the long side there, which is why it's going to be important that if you do decide to take this trade for here to here, you use a stop loss just underneath the prior 4-hour hammer low. Let's get into some of these quicker coins here. Again, just sort of updates on what's going on. SHIB is still above this line in the sand. As long as it's above, we'll keep it on the watch list, but it's really not looking so interesting with all of this activity here. Kind of reminds me of what's going on with Dogecoin. People just lose interest. It's a pop and drop. And again, so in terms of pattern, not really seeing anything. Maybe you could start to say that there's a symmetrical triangle building like this. It's coming to an end here. If it does break over the course of the weekend, your upside target's going to be about 42.67. If it's to the downside, be patient until we get into that prior breakout point from off the screen now at the 29.25. And that, again, is the line in the sand for Shiba Inu. Next up, we have Sandbox, okay? And this one is remaining on our radar again because it's above this breakout point. However, what is it forming, right? I would certainly start to argue that that's a descending triangle. Anything that takes us back underneath 448, not really interested in watching this coin going forward. It was sort of big and hot as it was making this move higher, pulling back, giving back way more of the gains than I would like to see on a chart like this. It's not really, it doesn't really have that momentum behind it anymore. So if it does break down, again, it's probably going to fall off of our radar here. Next up, we have Crow for Crypto.com coin. This one's on the radar for the reason being that it's currently trying to resolve this, right? It's not technically breaking down and firmly going underneath yet. Just like in sort of Shiba Inu, you can start to draw in something that might look a little bit like this. So it's a little bit descending triangle-esque, but more symmetrical in nature with not flat lows, technically higher lows here. So keep it on a watch list. Maybe it resolves it to the upside. If it does, it's all about breaking the downtrend, so the resistance trend line there, and getting back above 67 cents. If that happens, fine. Maybe with a little bit of social sentiment, remembering that this is, it's Crypto.com coin. It's the equivalent, or it does sort of the same thing as Binance Coin. I could see it, remaining elevated here and not just crumbling off and people forgetting about it over the course of time. So that's why this one's still on the list. Next up, we have Matic, which is what the, it was the hot name on the street last week. And it's back above, or it's still above rather, our sort of break and retest point here at the 2.146. So, keep it on watch. I would really only be interested in a new all-time high break here in the coin. Not so interested if it just wants to continue to chop around here. But again, just more of an update. Nothing to really talk about in terms of pattern. Maybe you start to classify this as a bit of a 4-hour bear flag. If it breaks, probably looking for these double bottom lows at 180. So that's Matic in a nutshell. And now let's get to the interesting one, okay? So COVAL, which of course stands for, as we mentioned, circuits of value. And this one is actually forming some pretty decent structure, I would say. It's newly being tracked inside of Coinbase right now. So we only have a little bit of price action to look at. This beautiful flag broke out. This could potentially turn into the next beautiful flag, and that's why we're going to talk about it in today's video. So what's the must-hold area? I would argue it's these lows at and around 16 cents. If you want to use all the decimals you can, it would be 0.16742, blah, blah, blah. But let's just call it 16 cents, a little bit greater than 16 cents, 17 cents, that general area. On any pullbacks that hold that, fantastic. From there, I would watch for a 4-hour candle close up above this at, let's call it 20, let's round up and call that one 23 cents, okay, to be more conservative. So that's what I would watch out for. Any consolidation that just does this and tightens, fantastic. Putting in a bullish pennant here, looking for the break at some point. If it turns into a pennant, then you would look for the highs as the first target. And then after that, you can walk it up into blue sky territories, right? So that's what I'm seeing here. And the reason I mentioned that the project is actually interesting is because, if we come on over to their website, and this is their website, by the way, it's circuitsofvalue.com, not associated. They're not paying me anything to talk about their coin, whatever. I think it's interesting because you can combine different tokens into a single token. Okay, so if you wanted to trade a basket of things, say Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, and Solana, let's say, you can take those, at least this is my understanding at least, pop them into one coin, so let's call that whatever you have for circuits of value, and now you can just trade this one asset which tracks all of those four. Okay, so that's kind of my understanding of it, at least. If you know something that I don't know and I'm explaining this improperly, please let me know in the comments section. Again, this is something I find fairly interesting and I do want to learn more. So again, if you know something I don't, let me know in the comments section. The chart pattern looks good. You know, could this just be a big hype thing and then it dies off and does something like this? Sure, it could be that, but ultimately we'll know that. And again, this is why technical analysis is so amazing. If it falls underneath 1674, then you're just simply putting it off your radar. I would say if it even starts breaking down underneath the prior breakout point, closer to 11 cents, it's definitely off your radar, right? So as long as it remains in here, does something fantastic, maybe we get another pennant. And again, based on what we just discussed over on the website there, the sort of fundamental reason why this is interesting, I do think it has some legs here to potentially break out and continue upwards. So that's really going to wrap up the video. If you enjoyed it today or learned anything new, let me know in the comments section or by giving the video a thumbs up. Don't forget our secondary channel is linked down below in the description. We do about 10 to 12 video ideas there every single day, not week, every day. And with that all being said, expect the weekly watch list to come out on Sunday as scheduled, and I wish you all a green trading weekend.